This is Victoria Cartagena. I play Renee Montoya on Gotham, and you're listening to Gotham TV Podcast.
Hey, this is Andrew Stewart-Jones. I play Crispus Allen on Gotham, and you are listening to Gotham TV Podcast.
How would Alfred deal with these two visitors to Gotham from Ireland?
Well, I mean, first of all, how did you get to the door? And secondly, I'd grasp you firmly by the elbow and I'd walk you very smartly to the gates, and I might even show you my commando knife. How's that?
You could set the dogs on us as well.
Yeah, well, no, I don't need dogs, mate.
You know.
Oh, and welcome back to Gotham TV Podcast. This is episode 41 of our show, covering The Blind Fortune Teller, episode 16 of Gotham. I'm Derek, I'm one of your hosts.
Hi, I'm John, one of your other hosts.
What do you think of this one, John?
Wow. Basically, this is a glorified Joker Watch episode, from Come Smile With Me to That Laugh, to an awful lot of clowns.
Yeah, absolutely. We were so excited about the preview of this episode a couple of months ago that we recorded an entire Joker Watch half-hour episode where we talked about our speculation about the possibility of Jerome being Joker, and finally we got to see the episode.
Exactly. And I mean, the thing with that as well is it was so difficult to miss and not read anything about this episode. It was really highly hyped purely on the basis of Jerome and the possibility, the potential that this character could be, in fact, the Joker.
Yeah.
This iconic bad guy in Gotham and in the Batman verse.
Yeah, we'll talk about it as we get into the episode. Just one other mention again, we talked about it last week. We've now recorded our first 5 reviews of Daredevil for Netflix, which you can hear over at defenderstvpodcast.com/iTunes. If you want to follow the Daredevil Netflix TV show, we'll be covering all 13 episodes of that show with reviews every week, or twice a week, I think we're looking for. So follow us over there and pick up those episodes if you want to have a listen to the other TV Marvel Universe coverage that we do.
Absolutely.
With that, I think on to our review of The Blind Fortune Teller. This episode of Gotham was written by Bruno Heller, the show's creator. Given that it's the introduction to the Flying Graysons and potentially a Joker, it looks like Bruno wanted to make sure this was in his hands to control how the episode went. John, do you want to give us a synopsis of the episode?
Absolutely. Whilst at the travelling circus on a date, Leslie and Jim's night out and the circus's show is interrupted by a violent and very real fight between the clowns, also known as the Lloyds, and the acrobats, the Flying Graysons. Jim and the GCPD step in to resolve this inter-family feud, but uncover more sinister developments at the circus, with the discovery of the brutally murdered body of the circus snake charmer by Jim and her son, Jerome. All the while, Bruce finally gets his day in front of the Wayne Enterprise board to voice his concerns over the commercial direction of the company. However, Alfred seems to be knowingly hesitant and worried with Bruce's course of action with the board of Wayne Enterprises. We also see Barbara return to Gotham, but her apparent hopes for her and Jim are dashed as Leslie and Jim's relationship seemingly goes from strength to strength. Meanwhile, after a cryptic message from the circus fortune teller, Cicero, Jim brings Jerome in for questioning. As revelations are uncovered in the interview, Jerome is ultimately arrested for the murder of his mother. Above all else, Jerome's behaviour and responses leaves a lasting and disturbing impression on all those in the interrogation room, as a distinctive laugh rings through the GCPD precinct.
I like that laugh as well.
Yeah, it was a distinctive hybrid laugh, and it seemed to throw in elements of Jack Nicholson, Heath Ledger, and even Cesar Romero's Joker laugh. Like, it felt natural to all of those to some extent, as that laugh rang out across the GCPD precinct.
I'm sure we're jumping ahead into our case notes. I'm sure one of us has written down something about Jerome to be discussed. So with that, do you want to start with your first case point?
I'm going to go straight in with the big guns, basically, and it's Jerome.
Uh-huh.
His introduction, the son of a murdered mother,
Mm-hmm.
the son of an unknown father, you know? Possibly Cicero. Well, is Cicero in the end? It's revealed. But basically, the introduction of this character, is he the Joker or is he not? I think either way, the first thing I want to say is I really liked how this character was drawn. It was disturbing. It was disturbing. Whether he's the Joker or not, it was a good character. It had disturbing elements, and it fitted to me quite nicely with coming from sort of the circus, this idea that, the circus has its own sort of laws and traditions that they kind of keep separate from mainstream society. All that was kind of drawn out. So I kind of liked this element. It was detached from the normal world, and that to me played out really well.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of whether Jerome is the Joker or not, I think from my point it would be to say that yes, he could be, but whether he is another matter. I think one of the great things about the Joker is he doesn't have a backstory, and that there are potentially multiple lines to his origin that he would always throw out. You saw that in Heath Ledger's Joker, where he keeps repeating different stories of why he got the scars and where he came from. And ultimately, you don't know which is true and which isn't. That mystery was brilliantly played with in Nolan's The Dark Knight. And I think, again, this could quite easily be Gotham playing around with multiple storylines of which they may or may not be the Joker. And if they're doing that, I think good on you. I think that's a really good way of doing it. If this is just a one-off and Jerome doesn't come back, I think I'll be slightly more disappointed with that, because I think his character was really good. The only thing I would say is, was he sent off to Arkham? Because his laugh and his response at the end of being found out as the murderer of his own mother was slightly crazy. So presumably he's gone to Arkham, or has he just gone into a normal prison? You don't get to find that out, other than that, he's been apprehended.
Yeah, I agree. I think Cameron Monaghan has done a really good job here. We know him from Shameless, another really good TV show in the States, a remake of a UK TV show. But we know him from that show. I think he does a great job here as Jerome. But whether he's the Joker or not, I don't think it really matters. In a sense, I think
absolutely
it doesn't show you the creation of why he would be the Joker, which is what we all expected to happen in this episode. We would expect it to have some kind of revelation as to why he brings the craziness to Batman and the craziness to Gotham in the future. You don't get that story. You get the story of a young man whose mother is carrying on with a lot of men around him while he's been growing up, and he's had enough of it, essentially, and takes out his anger on her and kills her. But does that mean he's the Joker or not? Not really.
No, it doesn't.
Not necessarily. It means that he killed his mother. That's all. That's all it means. It's not. It doesn't ruin anything of the backstory of the Joker, and doesn't give us a huge amount of insight into why he would be the future villain for Batman, or the future opposite side of the coin to Batman. We're not there yet, definitely, from this episode.
We're nowhere near there at all, and I think it's it's the laugh, it's the ginger hair, in a sense, that red fiery hair. All of those elements sort of come into play. And I think there's other aspects there as well. The fact that the circus can, as I said, be this nebulous kind of travelling group of people who have their own rituals, traditions. We see this in American Horror Story at the moment with Freak Show, which is like this traveling band of people. I'm not saying it's in the same way, but it's that notion of being different and being outsiders from normal society is the point really there. And that he's from that part of society where they have as well their own ways of handling murders and violence within the circus itself.
Yeah.
So, I liked that element to all of this, definitely.
One thing I would say, we've been covering the show for quite a long time, and as we said, we heard about this possible Joker a couple of months ago. I have been reading a lot of comments online saying that he doesn't do a great job of being Heath Ledger, or that he does do a great job of being Heath Ledger. I have to say 100%, I think he is trying to do a great Jack Nicholson. The look on his face and the style of the laughter in that iconic scene now in this episode, it really felt like Jack Nicholson. It felt more like something out of an early Jack Nicholson film or Batman. It didn't really feel like Heath Ledger's Joker at all. Heath Ledger's Joker is a very different character to what this character is, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do think that here, Cameron Monaghan really just has a great series of dialogue in that interrogation room where he says, "Don't be nagging me about the dishes," talking about his mum, when you're banging a clown in the next room. I mean, really kind of disturbing kind of sense of humour, but just done really well. I mean, his eyes are menacing. The way he just flips on a coin towards Cicero, who's just been kind of revealed as his father, is just really, really good. It's a great scene, and I do really want to see more of Jerome, irrespective of whether he's the Joker. I do think as well, Jim is kind of relentless, asking about his father, who he thinks is a sailor or a captain of a boat, and he's like, "Well, name some of the ships that your father was on," and he can't do it. He says, "Well, name the ship that he died on as it went down and sank," and he can't, and it's kind of very relentless streak from Jim here in the interrogation.
Yeah, I like the reaction from Leslie Thompkins in the background when she sees how hard Jim goes after this. I suppose he knows he's the murderer, but you can see on the face of Leslie Thompkins this is a different side of Jim than she would see in their normal relationship together. But yeah, really good scene.
I think one of the few things of this kind of investigation that just slightly annoyed me was, and I've mentioned this before, where there's suddenly just this change and you don't understand why they're suddenly solving the case. And I do think, again, here, all of a sudden, you don't get the reasoning behind why Jim is now bringing Cicero and Jerome in, and he's got this already planned out, and he knows that Jerome is the killer, and it's all kind of premeditated, and you don't really see that thought process or that reasoning within the previous scenes. There wasn't even any investigation of the Hellfire hatchet that was found by the Gotham bridge, from Cicero's whole sort of cryptic message that he delivers to Jim and to Leslie Thompkins. There's none of that reasoning out through that line of investigation to then say, well, this is nonsense. Therefore, what are the other options? Oh, it could be that Cicero was just feeding us this information. It's just suddenly plonked in that Jim knows this. And I don't know how he got to that conclusion. I'm not saying it needs to take 25 minutes of an hour episode. I'm just saying a couple of scenes or a couple of some serious dialogue with Harvey or Captain Essen talking about that investigation, what's going on, would just really help here, I think.
Yeah, perhaps. I know that Jim never believes that Cicero is a fortune teller. He does specifically say to Leslie, "All I do here is I work the case, I work the information that I'm given." But you're right, there isn't a moment where you see Jim say, "Well, this is what I'm going to do," or "This is what I believe." It's very much, well, I'm going to eliminate the fact that he's talking to someone from beyond the grave. And if he's not talking to someone from beyond the grave, then the reason why the hatchet is where it is because, well, he planted it there or told someone else to plant it there. He questions Cicero, but already has Jerome sitting outside waiting to come into the interview room. So it seems like a real shorthand, a really quickly put together. Yeah.
It is shorthand, and I can understand why they do this, but it is that element of, even with Cicero, maybe it was Cicero then. Why does he then suddenly pinpoint it onto Jerome? And how does he come to the conclusion that Cicero is Jerome's father? I mean, that is something that's just not really explored fully enough in that sort of build up to that scene, which is great in itself. But there's just certain threads that just appear from nowhere, and you kind of going, well, how does Jim know these things?
He is super detective.
Well, he is. But a little bit more exposition on that would, I think, really sort of add a bit more weight to some of these great scenes that we're seeing.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because he does investigate and interview probably 30 or 40 different individual clans and the Flying Graysons, essentially, but you don't hear any of them say anything about Jerome at all. They just want to talk about the feud between the two families, and that's it.
Yeah, and that whole investigation is played out in a more comedic role as well, which I actually really liked, and I'll come to that as one of my other points. But you could have just had a few lines dropped in there, which really sort of bring about a sense that it's Jerome is a bit nutty, or is maybe a bit of a sociopath or something,
perhaps.
and that leads Jim to thinking, well, I can't rule him out. But you don't hear any of that. So it just suddenly feels like it's like a eureka moment without finding out the reason or the path why Jim came to that decision or conclusion.
Yeah, get that. Anything else on Jerome from you?
No, I think that's all. I think a really good character introduced into the world of Gotham here. Whether he's the Joker or not, I really, really thought Cameron Monaghan played this character, Jerome, really, really well.
Yeah.
I think as well, any more of our thoughts on this particular scene, this hype around Jerome or the Joker, you can check that out on our Joker Watch special podcast as well.
Yeah.
Where we talk about Jerome and the Joker for about half an hour. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right, but you can't not talk about him. It's quite a big character introduction if he is the Joker. Well, my first case point is pretty connected to it. Really, it's actually just about Mr. Cicero, the blind fortune teller of the title of this episode. What really stood out to me, and I thought it was quite interesting, is that his sense of style, his I suppose how he dresses, is quite interesting to me, because he's wearing a big purple hat, very similar to one that the Joker would have worn in some issues of the Batman comic books, like The Man Who Laughs. It's quite interesting that this could be where the Joker gets his style from. I think he's wearing his purple outfit, quite similar to, as I say, Jack Nicholson's version of the character, or some of the 80s comic book versions. So it'll be interesting to see if Jerome is the Joker, will he take up that style, or will he go for more of the tragic punk style, which Heath Ledger had in the Dark Knight trilogy. So I just thought that was quite an interesting little touch for Mr. Cicero.
Yeah, definitely. And there was talk that his little sidekick with the kind of raccoon hat on, and the little kid there who's kind of guiding this blind fortune teller around, almost it's his cane in a sense. And there was talk as well that he could be the Joker.
I know.
I don't think so, but could be. There's another Joker Watch. Yeah,
that's true. This whole episode did start with with our Joker Watch theme, so this is the reason. There's lots of little revelations there. Yeah, I think the point on that was that somebody had said. I think one of the producers on the show had said that your Joker has been introduced, but may not necessarily be Jerome, just to kind of throw people off and have that whole concept of Joker Watch continue. So everybody was going, well, what about that character in the background of that scene, or that character in the background of that scene? You know, so is it the little boy with the furry hat, who would be much younger than Bruce Wayne? But we don't know what age the Joker is. We don't know how close in age the two of them are as characters. We just know he was created 75 years ago this year. That's all we know.
That is true. That is true.
But that's my point on Mr. Cicero. That's my first point that I pulled out of the episode. John, have you got a second point there?
I do. I have another 4, in fact,
Excellent.
with our 5 case points and case files. My next point is the comedy value brought in with the whole circus, the Haley's travelling circus. And in particular, how Captain Essen and Detective Bullock respond to all of a sudden having the GCPD precinct sort of inundated with clowns, acrobats, unicycle riders, lion tamers, all this kind of thing. I just thought it was a really nice sort of contrast with the disturbing murder investigation that occurs, the disturbing behaviour of Jerome in the interview room. I thought it was a nice little counterpoint to this comedy value that was underlying this episode, and I actually thought it worked really, really well. There are a number of points. I think Captain Essen, again, in her office. Jim has a great sequence of lines that she says to Jim. We'll play that here.
Back up a little. So you set the snake loose?
Yes, ma'am.
To track down the body?
Yes, ma'am. The snakes have an excellent sense of smell.
Well, now I know. And your prime suspects are a clown and an acrobat.
Yeah. Ain't this one a doozy?
Yeah, it's hilarious, isn't it?
You know, just this idea, your prime suspect is a clown and an acrobat, you know, you let a snake loose. Why would you do that? I mean, I love Captain Essen's delivery of her lines. It's like, you know, you are crazy. You are an atypical police detective. That seems to be the tone of her voice whenever she speaks to Jim after he's done something like crazy, stupid, you know, controversial or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I think the expressions here are on their faces, you know, as all the circus people are brought into the precinct. And, you know, Harvey's face here is great, where it's like, is this a prank? You know, is this like a complete and utter joke? You know, as he's watching all these people sort of shuffle in. So for me, I really kind of like this this contrast with some of the darker elements of this episode. Actually,
yeah,
I really did. I mean, even just the whole Jerome's mother being a snake charmer as well. You know, double meaning here, maybe, given that she is being called a prostitute, a loose woman in all of the dealings by her son in the end, but also from people in the circus. You know, there's a lot of kind of innuendo going on here as well, I think.
Trust you, John. Trust you.
Well, you know, it's a really, there is a fun and sort of mischievous side to this episode that I really liked, and I think it plays well with just the circus element. You know,
yeah.
So I thought that was great.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's some really good scenes there of humour. I do think the one thing I laughed most at was probably not intended to be funny, which is Jim releasing the snake to find the dead body of Jerome's mother. Yeah, I don't know whether that's possible at all. I have looked on the internet to see if it is possible to use a snake as a detective, but I don't think it is. The only thing I saw connected to it was Fox telling people that it was possible. But they produced the show, so.
Well, Captain Essen did as well. You know, she did say, can you actually use a snake in that way? She actually calls it out to Jim in her office, and he goes, yeah, they can, you know, smell the air with their tongue by taking the taste of it and find their way. And it's kind of delivered in a way that it's a known fact, but yeah.
Yeah, but using a snake as Lassie is probably something I didn't expect. Maybe he gets his own spin-off, Snakey.
Maybe.
Potentially.
So then, what's your next case point?
My next case point is the opening of the episode with Mrs. Kappleput. We've mentioned a couple of times here that this whole episode is really an extended Joker watch again. But yeah, the opening of the episode where she sings the tune When You're Smiling. The Whole World Smiles With You, which is a tune totally associated with the Joker for me. But she's standing on stage in Oswald, the newly redeveloped place where, you know, Oswald Cobblepot has been told he needs to go back much more to Fish's style because the punk music last week wasn't working very well for the clientele. But now he's obviously brought in that clientele and put his mother on stage to sing an old jazz tune or an old tune. They're not very happy with Mrs. Cobblepot. But yeah, you certainly don't criticize Mrs. Kappleput in front of Oswald, do you? That is a truly great moment when the heckler tells the old bag to get off the stage. And just in off scene, I think it's a fantastically put together scene that's done where Oswald stalks out of the scene and hits the guy with a bottle, spreading blood over another one of the patrons. I don't think he's going to continue to get that many patrons if he keeps killing them off.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's a great little sort of sequence. And again, it's played to comedy value, where off screen you hear the smash of the glass and then the poor lady gets covered in blood. There's limited applause. I think I mentioned it last week. I have this feeling that the club will see rough times. there's an element of it here where no one is really applauding Gertrude's rendition of the song. Is smiling with pure sort of pride and being chuffed at his mum on stage. There's a distinctive kind of, I think, Eastern European folk sound being done here, which I think harks to her sort of origin and her backstory as well. That sympathy in her taste of this Eastern European folk music sound, I really like that. Even the girl with the violin, as and when Victor Zsasz comes in, it's all very kind of a folky sound to me, which obviously isn't playing well with the punters at all. There's no applause, so this seems like hard times are falling on the club now, to the point where we do see the reintroduction of Butch as well. That's right. By Victor Zsasz, who is brought in to sort out the mess that is currently being generated by Penguin in relation to the money generation. And as we know from the previous episode, Falcone thinks this is an important club for money, influence, and control of Gotham. Yeah, absolutely. I just love the scene. I love the scene with Mrs. Kappleput. Anything that she's involved in obviously makes me really happy. But that's my next point is Mrs. Kappleput at Oswald's. Enjoyed that. John, next one. Mine next point is something that really is bringing or starting to bring to fruition elements that were brought in back in the episode called Viper, which I think was episode 5. And that is Bruce Wayne finally getting to sit with the board of Wayne Enterprises. Yeah. And there's a few aspects of this that I really, really liked. Right at the start of the episode, we see Alfred's hesitancy, kind of a cautiousness come into his response to Bruce to say, is this a good idea? I want to put it out here right now. I don't think you should go to the board. It's like he knows something from working with Thomas and Martha Wayne previously. He knows something a bit more about the board of Wayne Enterprises and maybe some of the internal conflicts that Thomas Wayne used to have on that board. And that I like. I think that adds a new dynamic or a bit more of a threat to Bruce going to the board of Wayne Enterprises.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, obviously, Thomas ran the board with a sense of justice, with a sense of holding them to a higher standard than most businesses. But it seems like, as you say, that Alfred always thought that was a difficult thing to run a company like that, and he doesn't want to get the young man Bruce involved in it at this stage. It doesn't seem like he may not be able to influence the board that much, and Alfred doesn't really trust them to do what he says. But yeah, fantastic scene.
I think then, the scene actually in the boardroom, and I thought that boardroom was pretty cool. It was like a box within a room, a glass box within a room. Right. But I thought that whole scene as well, where he delivers his two areas of concern, both harks back to the Arkham Asylum development, and that being meted out between Maroni and Falcone by the mayor's office, and also then weapons manufacturer at Wellsine Pharmaceuticals, and the whole Viper episode then as well. So it's got some good links back to earlier episodes, I think, but then just how Bruce delivers the line about his age, I think, is great, and I think we have the clip here.
I hope you do look closely into these issues, because I'll be raising them at the next shareholders meeting with a view to possible legal action.
Dear me, legal action. These are all very deep waters for such a young man.
My youth is not relevant, except that if I were a man, I would be chairing this board. And I would be sure that Wayne Enterprises was run honestly. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, it's just great. I love the reaction of the board where it's like, "Hi, young man, welcome to your special day coming into the offices of the company your father owned," kind of thing. And then he just delivers that, says my age isn't an issue, and then delivers a fantastic speech. I think if my CEO was to deliver that, it would be quite an inspiring speech to say, I've looked into the books. These are the things I'm concerned about. if I was older, I'd be running the company, essentially. And I want you to run the company the way I want it run from there.
That's the thing, but I think it's done and balanced really well, because you could have the delivery of that line where it wouldn't seem to fit with the person who is giving it because of their age. But I think the way David Mazouz is doing the whole character of a young Bruce Wayne, it feels totally at home with this younger character, that he would deliver that kind of speech to older people. He's not afraid of being young. He's not afraid of telling other people who are much older than him, that he has issues and concerns, that he is advocating a responsibility. And I just thought that was a really nice sort of grown-up way of dealing with that age issue that some people may have. And I think it's been done really, really well. And then, as you say, the look on the board members' faces, which is kind of, oh, we can, swap this little kid off quite easily. But he makes them sit back up and listen. And it'll be interesting to see then how that plays out in any future episodes, because obviously that's all we really get on this whole meeting of Bruce Wayne with the board. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the course of the rest of the season, because I'm really liking the idea of the darker elements in Wayne Enterprises. And even from what we talked about from WonderCon in our last episode, the issue of the Court of Owls, whether that could be introduced here, is a really nice kind of intriguing and delicious sort of prospect that could be here. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point to note that the last time we had talked about Wayne Enterprises as such was with the character Martha Mathis, who we know wasn't a member of the board, but the fact that she doesn't appear in this episode at all, it still gives you that kind of shadowy idea as to whether somebody else is controlling these bad elements within Wayne Enterprises and the board aren't aware of it, or the board may be aware of it and are dealing with Martha Mathis. I can't say her name. Sometimes I just find it quite difficult to say the two words together. Sorry. But you don't know whether it's the board that are doing this or whether it's Martha Mathis that's doing
going off elements on her own. Yeah, exactly.
So I thought it was a good idea to keep her out of this episode so that we still have that the potential duality of the board, whether they're involved or whether they're the ones controlling it. So, but yeah, really good point. I really enjoyed that one.
So Derek, what's your next case note?
My next one is actually about Leslie and Jim. A really good, interesting little confrontation there that they have in the park when they're looking for the murder weapon. I just thought it was a good point because it's something that we've talked about in the past between the relationship between Jim and Barbara, that Jim's looking for a strong woman, and Leslie calls it out. Leslie says, you say you want a strong woman to share this life with you, but you really want me at home to bake cakes. I think it's interesting that Leslie's seeing that side of Jim that we've talked about in the past. She's seeing that, he says one thing, wants another, essentially. But yeah, this is the first real confrontation in an episode where you can see their relationship develop and deepen. We've said the two of them are quite similar characters. She's very interested in the investigations. She really wants to be involved in everything that's going on and has the ability to be involved, whereas Barbara, while she wanted to be involved, she couldn't handle that side of Jim's life. But I thought it was interesting that it was called out by Leslie in this episode.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of is a bit of a roller coaster. In the synopsis, I say they go from strength to strength, but that's only because they've kind of rolled back down the hill to some extent. But it's an entire roller coaster. They start off on a date, everything seems fine. As you say, they go through these motions where Leslie is again questioning, what is it, Jim, that you want from a relationship? And then Jim kind of relenting and saying, well, okay, I will bring you into the interrogation room with Jerome. And actually, Leslie, being a bit of a thrill seeker, really, even though she's disturbed by what she saw, she's grateful to having seen that part of Jim's work and being involved in it, as you say, because she can be, unlike Barbara. I mean, to the extent that she actually joined the GCPD as the medical examiner.
Yeah.
And then by the end, it's that they're in a strong, loving embrace. Unfortunately, as Barbara walks in to see this, but it's that kind of roller coaster. And again, she calls out Jim's uncertainty as to what it is he actually likes. I mean, we saw that previously. He tells Leslie about the medical examiner post. She, on her own initiative, goes for the job, gets it. When she's there, all of a sudden, Jim almost kind of pulls back from it. Don't show any kind of affection here, and so on. And whilst that might be like fine, and I would understand that in terms of office romances, nonetheless, she's the one that, well, we kissed in the precinct before, in the locker room, and so on. Why are you suddenly becoming all coy with me? What is it that you want? And again, she calls that out over the dinner table. And it's a really nice dynamic. It's a real sort of a working through kind of dynamic that we as the audience get to see how their relationship is developing.
Yeah. Just one other point about the discussions between the two of them. Jim totally ignores Leslie's opinion. So Leslie's opinion is that the blind fortune teller is telling the truth, that he could possibly be talking to someone from beyond the grave. Weirdly, he says, "You're a scientist. How can you even believe in this kind of stuff?" And she says, "There's some things that science can't explain." To which Jim responds, "Yeah, like people who like folk dancing," which I thought was a really funny line. But he places no credence in her belief that the blind fortune teller is telling the truth. That they instantly diverse in opinions from that point onwards, essentially. But I think it's quite interesting. I think they do a good job of setting up the relationship. And again, we know it's probably destined for failure. And unfortunately, Barbara has now caught them in the act. So poor Barbara is again spiraling down. Another rug has been pulled from under the character, so it'll be interesting to see what happens to her next week. That was my case point, John.
Yeah, well, obviously we get to see the Flying Graysons introduced here. The Grayson family flying through the air as acrobats in the big top at the circus. And for me, I thought it was nicely done. It wasn't overly done. There was a touch of Romeo and Juliet about it, with this feud with the Lloyds and the Graysons. And especially kind of this little kernel of love interest between Mary Lloyd on one side and then John Grayson on the other side, who ultimately are the parents of Dick Grayson, Robin, at a future date. And I kind of really liked that aspect of this feud between the two. The feud, though, is 3 generations long, and it's over a horse.
That's right.
And it's slightly weird that it would be that, and I have no idea whether that is from the comics or anything. I mean, it can't be.
Not,
no, but I would have preferred to have seen this feud in a Romeo and Juliet style, a bit more, where it's the Capulets and the Montagues, where they just don't get on. They're rivals for being the biggest thing in the circus, but actually a member from each camp is falling in love with the other. That leads to the birth of Dick Grayson.
Yeah. Like it's all right. I like the introduction of the Flying Graysons. They're introduced quite well. We probably know them from the comic books from really just that sequence where we're introduced to them visiting the town and doing acrobatics, and then unfortunately get killed. The story's been told many times. They've been killed by different people, and as usual with the stories of Batman, the origin gets muddied over the years. So there's various different versions of who's responsible for their death. But the one thing I really, really didn't like was how it was the end of the episode where Mary and John talk to Jim Gordon and call it out specifically. If it wasn't for you solving this case, Jim, we would never have gotten together, and nobody would ever know that the two of us were in love, and nobody would ever have accepted our love. If we have a child, we'll call him Gordon. Terrible ending to the episode, and terrible ending to their relationship. I presume they're not going to appear again now until they have a baby in tow, and they're going to now have to explain why they didn't call him Gordon, why they called him Dick Grayson. But
That was hugely cringeworthy.
Really
it really was. It was wedged in there like, I don't know, something horrendously wedgy that was out of place. And that's what I mean, where I would have preferred to have seen the feuding elements of these two families done slightly differently.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, there was a setup there of Romeo and Juliet to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Do it along those lines. 3 generations worth of feuding over a horse.
That's the comedy, and I totally get that.
Yeah, but it's not good comedy. That's my point.
Okay.
I mean, there was much better comedy value for me in this episode. That to me was just stupid.
Right.
Surely someone at some point went, that's ridiculous. Let's move on. Get on with it. So I didn't really buy that. I would have much preferred to have seen it being a rivalry to do with being the biggest event in the circus show, and that maybe the Graysons did something that offended the Lloyds because they took the limelight, that kind of thing, because they're performers. That seems to me to be reasonable. But then you have this secret relationship going on between Mary and John on the different sides. Would have been much better. I mean, I completely agree with you. That line at the end, and she's got the ring on as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it does, again, it was like high velocity to this ending, which didn't need to happen in season 1 at this moment in time.
Yeah, you could have the two of them vacationing in or holidaying in Gotham in a year's time and say, look, we got together after what happened.
Or the circus returns next year.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember as a kid, the circus came into town once a year, and you'd go and visit it. I don't think that happens anymore in many places. But you do it like that. You could have the circus returning each year in each of the seasons and see it develop over that time.
Yeah.
I mean, what a great little motif throughout each of the seasons that could be dealt with in that kind of way. But instead, it's all rushing and careering in a dreadful kind of car crash to this really awkward line and dialogue at the end, which serves no purpose.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That it about the Flying Graysons for you?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I actually really liked how they were introduced with the circus and the date and all surrounding this murder of the snake charmer. But, it could have been handled more Romeo and Juliet style, I think.
Okay.
So then, what's your final point?
My final point is Fish Mooney. This episode again, just the character of Fish developing as a leader, and you can now see why she has such control in Gotham. We talked about it last week a little bit, but I really love this. I felt that it's the kind of character I now want to follow and want to see what happens to her. She has gone from strength to strength over the last couple of episodes, particularly, but showing the guys coming down to take one of the prisoners away, and she's rallied all the troops together, but to essentially say that if they come to try and take somebody else, we'll kill him because they need him alive. That's really interesting development for the Fish Mooney character. I do love just a quick side note at the beginning of this portion of the episode where she's standing on the back of one of the prisoners to elevate herself up above everybody else. I thought that was really interesting. It was almost like something from Egypt or something like that, some kind of very old style leader of the camp. But yeah, I think it's really fascinating that she's essentially saying to them that we have to either live together or die alone. The Lost speech, I think, is what she's referencing there. But a really good motivational moment for Fish, where she gets the whole team together and tells them that we're going to work together to get out of this, but not all of us are going to get out of it.
Well, 57A certainly doesn't get out of it. He gets a lot of punches to the body and to the head, and ultimately he doesn't make it. I mean, I think this is a really good development of Fish cementing her power in this basement, in this prison, but also then sparking a rebellion against their captors, but in a way that keeps them having power. It's really interesting, and it all pays off in the end, where she is being let out to go and see the manager, in a sense. who is this guy and how is that going to play out? It'll be really interesting to see who is at the top of this unknown organization in this building that has a prison underneath filled with people. And certainly given the no eyes lady at the end of the last episode where she comes in and they took my eyes. So, what are they doing here? And how does that sort of play into maybe some of the other things that we've heard about who could be behind this ultimately? It'll be really interesting.
Yeah. But definitely, Fish's character is really being developed quite well here. And I can see why she was in the power position that she was in Gotham. She's definitely showing that she can control a room full of people and guide them into what she wants them to do.
She is a tough character, and it's great. This is a strong and determined woman, and I love seeing this. Even though we're still in the dark about who is above her and what's going on above her in this facility, it's just such a good personal journey for her character down in this basement, and it is brilliant. It's really good.
Yeah. John, what's your final point about the episode?
My final point is the reintroduction of Butch. Unfortunately for me, and this is again maybe a slight negative element here, is Butch Gilzean dancing. I wasn't taken with it. I thought it undermined his character. I know he's been experimented on or he's had stuff done to him by Victor, and I like that kind of aspect to it. I just didn't think it should have been played out with, you can get him to do anything, and then Oswald asks him to dance. I like the idea that Butch is still there and that he's not being killed off. For me, that is great because I love this character. I love the journey that he has gone on with Fish, and being that loyal right-hand person. I just thought it was excellent. Yeah. And he's come back, and to begin with, it was great because he was there. It looked almost like a zombie. Yeah. Like, he was sort of blank. It was this blank expression of having been, had something done to him by Victor. And it looked really good. You saw the terror in Oswald as he suddenly is just stood there. What's this guy going to do? And Victor says, you can control him. I just wish they hadn't then done the dance.
Yeah, I know.
To me, just undermined elements of what we had seen previously of Butch and that journey. It's a short little blip. That's it. And it isn't going to ruin Butch Gilzean for me at all. But there's some things where I do question the choice of and timing of why and when they did it. And in this sense, that was one of them for me.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I know the show tries to strike the balance between a show for kids and a show for adults. It tries to walk the tightrope between those two things. But sometimes it just gets it so wrong. Over here in the UK and Ireland, it airs at 9 p.m. in the evening, which generally means that it's after the watershed and is only a show for adults. It's not for kids. Whereas in the US, it airs at 8 p.m., which is generally a time reserved for programs that are for the whole family, essentially. So what we see in the past is we've had some very violent pieces. We've had, discussions about, on our show, we've talked about how some of those violent scenes would not be appropriate for people under the age of 12. We talked about, the drug use that's in some of the episodes, not being appropriate for people that are under the age of 12. And that's why it's reserved for a program after 9 p.m. But having this kind of scene with Butch Gilzean dancing is totally inappropriate for a show just for adults. It doesn't fit the tone of the show that they've been making for the last couple of months.
But I think that even with this episode, you have a disturbing character like Jerome. You have the brutal murder of someone where you see the body, you see the blood. You have these discussions about her being a prostitute, being a lady of the night, and so on. And this, some of the lines that came from Jerome, which I thought were really good, just that sort of kind of resentment to an extent of her nagging him, but don't nag me and be having sex with a clown in the other room. That, really good, really quite strong, really adult.
Yeah.
And some of the comedy elements for me worked, like all the circus coming into the GCPD, because I thought it was a nice balance. It was the circus of the precinct and the circus coming into the precinct, and some of the lines surrounding that. And then there are other moments where it just doesn't fit to what they've been doing with that character.
Yeah.
And for me, it's purely my opinion, and it's just purely my own kind of preference. I didn't like that aspect of Butch dancing. It didn't fit to me with the scene, because Victor is such a menacing character in himself. Butch is, and just the way he was played to begin with, as I say, blank, emotionless, and then he does this kind of, fairly emotionless dance as well, but I just didn't think he needed to do that.
Yeah.
Ask him to fire a gun and to not actually then point it at Oswald to kill him, that he just fires it.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, now we're done kind of with our 5 points, but I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion that this particular episode was written by Bruno Heller, who's the creator of Gotham. It feels like the reason he took this on was because he was introducing the Joker and introducing the other big element to the Batman universe, which is Robin. He was introducing the parents of Robin and the Flying Graysons. Do you think he was successful in taking on this episode himself?
I can understand why he would take it on. Having said that, I think he could also have delegated it. I don't think there was any particular reason for why he needed to take it on. I think, for me, one of the bigger issues, rather than... Bruno Heller did the first episode, and I thought that was really, really good. I think maybe with Jerome, with the Flying Graysons, maybe there were 2 really big elements that had to be brought in and introduced, and that caused problems with the pacing of the episode. But I think for me, there's a lot in this episode that I really, really like, such as the Graysons being introduced, the comedy elements, Jim and Leslie's relationship, Barbara coming back, Jerome. Some really, really good elements here, but I do think that maybe there was a lot of hype surrounding the episode because of this idea that maybe the Joker's being introduced. You also have the Graysons, and maybe there was a bit too much to live up to here, because actually, on watching it, I felt that this was more of almost like a transitory sort of episode in between sort of larger beats, yet it had Jerome in there. And I think without him, and I think without some of those other elements, this would have been a very different kind of episode. I think for me anyway, overall, this isn't one of my favourite episodes by a long way, but I think it's solid, and I think it's good, and I think with Jerome, it certainly moves it into that area, which is, it's a good episode for me. Right. I think without him, I think it may have been played out quite differently, but then there wouldn't have been the hype as well. I think sometimes hype can kill something.
Yeah.
And I think maybe to an extent there was slightly too much surrounding this notion of the Joker, and it maybe should have been underplayed more.
Yeah. Yeah, I do agree with you. I think they definitely hit the hype stride with this episode. The images of Jerome as the potential Joker were everywhere, and I know the ratings for this episode were probably the highest they'd been since early on in the season. There's definitely an appetite out there for people to see the Joker in the Gotham TV show. But as an episode, I would feel it's pretty unfortunate for the 2 or 3 million extra people that tuned into this episode who probably hadn't watched another episode of Gotham, that this is what they ended up getting. I think people probably would have been expecting more. I know I was expecting a lot more out of this episode. I did like Jerome, and I did like the character. Whether he's the Joker or not, as we discussed, I don't know whether that's even the right question to be asking. But the marketing department of Fox certainly thought enough that he was the Joker to promote it very heavily. But I don't know whether it will get people to tune into next week's episode or not, which is unfortunate. That's what they should be trying to do in the first season of a show, is trying to make sure that people are coming back every week for episodes rather than just jumping in to watch one. I think that this episode will turn some people off and create more people that are disappointed in the show than people that are excited to see what happens next week. Speaking of next week, we have another connection to the Joker. We have the Red Hood gang arriving in Gotham.
And I'm really excited by this because I think it kind of comes back to what I said earlier in the episode, and also my hope for the character of Jerome, that we're being introduced to a huge number of different backstories to the possibility of the Joker, but at the end of the day, and when all things are said and done, that the Joker's backstory ultimately is a mystery. That maybe one of these is his actual backstory in the minds of the writers and the creators of this show, and even DC Comics, but we're never told that. That to me is really an interesting prospect, that we can look at all these different storylines and decide, oh, I like that one, that could be the Joker's, but we never know whether that's the true Joker.
Yeah.
I hope it goes along that line, and I think given the title of The Red Hood, maybe that is what's being done here by the Gotham writers. I hope so. I hope we don't get a definitive, this is the backstory of the Joker. I hope we're given a smorgasbord, if you will, of potential backstories for the Joker, or could be the Joker's backstory, but we will never know.
Yeah, no, really interesting.
Thank you for joining us for the review of The Blind Fortune Teller. We hope you enjoyed it. We would certainly love to hear your thoughts. Please give us your thoughts on feedback@gothamtvpodcast.com. What did you think of Jerome? Do you think he's the Joker? Do you think the Flying Graysons were introduced well? What did you think of Butch Gilzean dancing? It would be interesting to hear your thoughts on this episode, given the hype surrounding it. Remember, you can listen to us on iTunes. Just go to gothamtvpodcast.com/iTunes. You can also follow us on Stitcher, Player FM, or any other good podcast catcher. Remember, you can always leave us a review, and you'll be entered into the competition if we read out the comments, thoughts, or review on the air.
All right, thanks again for listening. We'll be talking to you next week for The Red Hood.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.
Gotham TV Podcast. Do not cross Alan M. Montoya.
When you're smiling, when you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you. When you're laughing, oh, when you're laughing, the sun comes shining through.
You know.
It seemed like a hybrid between Jack Nicholson and the other one. It seemed like a little hybrid between Jack Nicholson and then
Heath Ledger.
It seemed like a distinctive hybrid between Jack Nicholson and Heath Ledger's Joker, and even with a bit of what's his face in for good measure.
God, will you stop it? You're adding stuff that you don't, that you can't remember. Cesar Romero.